You look beautiful tonight.
Some people walk into your life like sunlight, warm, gradual, expected, and then there are people like Cha Christian who walk in like a solar eclipse. Breathtaking, terrifying, and capable of plunging everything into sudden, disorienting darkness before anyone understands what is happening. Claire Adaeze Okonkwo was 25 years old, standing in the lobby of Seoul's most prestigious fashion house, clutching a portfolio she had spent 6 months perfecting when she first saw him. She would later say she knew immediately that he would change her life, but the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that the first time Claire saw Cha Christian, she thought he was the most beautiful and most dangerous thing she had ever encountered, and she was right on both counts, for reasons she could not possibly have imagined yet. But that moment comes later. Because before the story of the man who would break her and then spend months learning how to be worthy of putting her back together, there is the story of the girl she was before he arrived. The girl who still believed, despite every piece of evidence Seoul had offered to the contrary, that the world was fundamentally kind if you looked at it from the right angle. Claire Adaeze Okonkwo had been raised in Accra, Ghana, by parents who taught her 3 things above everything else. Work like the ancestors are watching. Carry yourself like you deserve every room you enter. And never, under any circumstances, let the world's smallness shrink you. Her mother, Dr. Beatrice Okonkwo, was a literature professor who quoted Toni Morrison at breakfast and could silence an auditorium with a single raised eyebrow. Her father, Emmanuel Okonkwo, had built his tailoring business from a single sewing machine in the family's parlor to a boutique that dressed half of Accra's elite. Between the two of them, they had given their daughter an inheritance worth more than any bank could hold, the unshakable belief that beauty was something you created, that excellence was something you earned, and that worth existed entirely independent of whether anyone else was gracious enough to recognize it. Claire had carried that inheritance to Seoul 3 years ago on a full academic scholarship to Yonsei University's fashion design program. She had carried it through the modeling agency that told her skin was too rich for Korean commercial campaigns, their words, delivered with the apologetic smile people used when they wanted someone to accept their own erasure gracefully. She had carried it through landlords who suddenly remembered apartments were unavailable when they saw her face, through subway passengers who photographed her hair without asking, through the exhausting, relentless, daily performance of proving that she deserved to exist in spaces that had not been designed with her in mind. Claire was good at carrying things. Her parents had made sure of that, but even the strongest person eventually needs to set something down. She did not know. On the morning she walked into the lobby of Christian Holdings' Seoul headquarters, that she was about to encounter the weight that would finally make her knees buckle. The internship opportunity had come through her professor, Dr. Song Yoon-jae, who had connections to every significant fashion and luxury brand in the city. Christian Holdings was legendary, a conglomerate that touched everything from real estate to high fashion, from private aviation to boutique hotels. Their aesthetic division had recently announced a collaboration with emerging designers, and Dr. Song had submitted Claire's portfolio without telling her, certain her student was exactly what they were looking for. "You represent something this industry needs," Dr. Song had told her, her eyes bright with the particular excitement of someone who has spotted genius before it knows its own name. "Go, impress them. Don't apologize for taking up space." Claire wore her best dress for the interview. She had made it herself, of course, a structured wrap silhouette in deep ivory silk with hand-embroidered kente pattern detailing along the neckline and hem. Traditional Ghanaian craftsmanship made contemporary. Her long, voluminous curls were impeccably styled, each coil defined and gleaming, cascading past her shoulders in the kind of crown that took 2 hours to perfect but looked, she hoped, effortless. Gold stud earrings, nude heels. The full 5 feet 7 inches of her moving through that lobby like she owned it, because her mother's voice lived in her spine, and her mother's voice said, "Always walk like you belong." The lobby was all glass and steel and calculated intimidation, every surface polished to mirror brightness, every angle designed to make visitors feel small and temporary. The receptionist looked up from her desk with the particular expression Korean women reserved for Black women in professional spaces. Not hostile exactly, just recalibrating, just fitting Claire into a category that clearly required some adjustment. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment," Claire said in Korean, smiling. "Claire Okonkwo, for the Aesthetic Division internship." The recalibration happened again. Her Korean was fluent, accented but clear, and the receptionist processed that fact with visible effort before recovering into professional politeness. "One moment, please." Claire sat in one of the lobby's angular chairs and practiced the breathing technique her mother had taught her for exactly these moments. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. You are not a visitor in this world. You are not a curiosity. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. She was halfway through her 3rd breath cycle when the elevator doors opened and Cha Christian walked in. No, that description was completely inadequate. Cha Christian did not walk in. Cha Christian arrived the way storms arrive, preceded by a shift in atmospheric pressure, a sudden alertness in everyone nearby, a collective held breath that preceded the thunder. He was enormous. 6 feet 8 inches of perfectly constructed humanity, dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly been built by someone who understood that clothing existed to serve the body wearing it, not to impose structure on it. The fabric moved with him like it was grateful for the opportunity. His face was exactly what Korean cinema had been training the world to appreciate for decades: sharp jaw, high cheekbones, the kind of symmetrical bone structure that made you wonder briefly if he was real or architectural. Dark hair swept back from a face that would have made Renaissance painters weep with professional jealousy. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid, authoritative Korean that carried across the lobby without him raising his voice even slightly. Numbers, acquisitions, a tone of absolute command that suggested he had never in his life made a request that was not simply a politely worded instruction. He did not look at Claire as he crossed the lobby. He looked at no one. His eyes were fixed somewhere in the middle distance, that particular 1,000-yard stare of someone whose mind was operating on a plane several stories above where his body happened to be standing. What Claire noticed, in the few seconds before the receptionist called her name and redirected her attention, was that he was both breathtaking and completely, utterly sealed. Like a museum exhibit behind glass. Magnificent, untouchable, and somehow profoundly lonely, though she could not have articulated why she felt that looking at someone who radiated power from every expensive fiber of his being. Then the receptionist called her name, and Claire gathered her portfolio and her mother's voice and went to meet her future. The interview went beautifully. The Aesthetic Division's creative director, a warm woman named Ms. Park Hyun-soo, spent 40 minutes with Claire's portfolio and asked questions that revealed genuine understanding of what the young designer was attempting. She saw the conversation between traditions and the work. She used words like innovative and necessary and precisely what we've been missing. By the time Claire left her office, she was cautiously, carefully hopeful in the way that feels dangerous, because hope is the thing that makes disappointment truly devastating. The offer came 3 days later. A 6-month internship, paid, with the possibility of a full-time position at the end. Claire accepted before she finished reading the email. She called her mother and they both cried on the phone for 10 minutes, and then Dr. Beatrice quoted Otter Lord until her daughter was laughing instead of weeping. She called her father, and Emmanuel Okonkwo told her he had known since she was 5 years old, picking apart the seams of his sample garments and reconstructing them with toddler-sized determination, that she would end up exactly here. She started the following Monday. The work was extraordinary, challenging, stimulating, the kind of creative environment she had dreamed about while sewing in her university dormitory at midnight. Ms. Park was a generous mentor. Her colleagues were curious about her in ways that ranged from genuinely warm to anthropologically uncomfortable, but mostly warm. For the first 2 weeks, Claire existed in a bubble of professional satisfaction that almost made her forget the particular exhaustion of being the only Black person in every room. Almost. Because in those 2 weeks, she also had her first real encounter with Cha Christian. Not a conversation. Not even eye contact, technically. But he passed through the aesthetic division offices 3 times in those 14 days, always moving with that same sealed, deliberate energy, always followed by assistants barely keeping pace, always speaking into a phone or reading documents on a tablet. And each time he passed through, Claire felt it, not attraction exactly, though she would have needed to be clinically unaware of beauty not to acknowledge his. Something more complicated. A wrongness. A wrongness in the way his eyes slid over her without landing. The way his expression carried something that went beyond professional disinterest into something colder, more intentional. The 3rd time it happened, Ms. Park noticed Claire noticing. "Don't take it personally," she said quietly, her voice careful. "He's been difficult since his father passed, 2 years ago. He keeps the business running perfectly, but the man inside is..." She trailed off, clearly deciding she had said enough. "Just don't take it personally." Claire nodded and went back to her work. But she filed the information away, because she was a woman who had learned to read rooms for her own protection, and something in that room needed reading. The first time Christian actually spoke to Claire, she had not been prepared for it. Her mother's voice in her spine was not loud enough to protect her from what came out of his mouth. It was a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks into her internship. Claire had stayed late to finish a concept board for a presentation the following morning, and most of the office had emptied by 7 o'clock. She was alone in the design studio, surrounded by fabric swatches and mood boards, and the particular peaceful concentration that came when the world got quiet enough to hear what the work was saying. She did not hear him enter. He moved quietly for a man his size, another intimidation tactic, perhaps, refined through long practice. She became aware of his presence only when the energy in the room changed, that atmospheric pressure shift she had learned to associate with him. She turned from her work table. He was standing in the doorway, still in his suit from the day, though the jacket was now gone and his shirt collar was open, the single concession to informality that somehow made him look more severe, not less. In his hand was a folder. His expression as he looked at her was absolutely unreadable, not neutral, not professional, something that lived in the negative space between those words. "Miss Okonkwo," he said. Her name in his mouth was a statement of fact, not a greeting. "Mr. Cha," Claire kept her voice level, warm but professional. "I wasn't aware you'd be coming through this evening." "I own the building," he said. "I come through whenever I like." It was not hostile exactly, but it was a reminder, a repositioning of exactly where she stood relative to exactly where he stood. She felt it the way you feel a change in weather before the rain arrives. "Of course," she said simply. "Is there something I can help you with?" He looked at her work table, looked at the concept board she had been building. His eyes moved across it with a professional assessment that felt entirely involuntary, like he was incapable of looking at design work without analyzing it, even when he did not want to. What she had been building was ambitious. A concept collection that explored the relationship between traditional Ghanaian kente weaving and Korean bojagi, wrapping cloth, 2 textile traditions built on geometric precision and the meaningful arrangement of color. The mood board showed both textiles in their traditional contexts, then proposed conversations between them in contemporary silhouettes. It was the most personal work Claire had done at the company, and having his eyes on it felt unexpectedly vulnerable. "The colors don't work," he said flatly. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "The combination." He gestured vaguely at the board without approaching it. "It's too busy. Korean consumers won't connect with it." Something rose in Claire's chest. She pressed it down carefully. "With respect, sir, the research I've done suggests that the current market is responding strongly to multicultural aesthetic references. The Bojagi tradition specifically is having a significant cultural moment internationally." "You're an intern," he said. The words landed like a filing stamp. Final, administrative. Leave the market analysis to people who have been here longer. He turned and walked out. The folder he had been carrying, which clearly had nothing to do with her or her work, was tucked under his arm as he disappeared into the corridor. Claire stood at her work table for a long moment. Her mother's voice was there, as always, firm and warm in the architecture of her posture. "You are not a curiosity. You are not a visitor. You are exactly where you belong." But her hands, when she looked down at them, were trembling slightly. Not with devastation, with something more dangerous, recognition. She recognized the specific texture of that dismissal. The way it had nothing to do with her work or her competence and everything to do with looking at her and seeing something he had already decided he did not want to see. She had been here before, in different cities, with different faces, delivered in different languages. And every single time, the recognition felt like a door slamming, like being told the room she had been invited into had quietly uninvited her while she was not watching. Claire finished her concept board. She made it better than it had been before he walked in, because that was the only response worth making. And then she went home to her small apartment and called her best friend Adaeze back in Accra and told her everything. And Adaeze told her every curse word in 3 languages. And by the time they hung up, Claire was laughing, because survival sometimes looked like laughing with your best friend at 11 at night. But the universe, it turned out, was not finished with Christian and Claire. Not even close. 3 days after the Worktable Incident, Ms. Park called her into her office with an expression that told Claire something significant was happening. "I want to put you on the Hanu Collection project," she said. The Hanu Collection was Christian Holdings' flagship seasonal line, the one that garnered international press coverage and set the aesthetic tone for the entire brand. Being placed on it as an intern was extraordinary. Being placed on it 6 weeks in was nearly unprecedented. "Your concept work has been exceptional, Claire. I want you in the room for the direction meetings." "Thank you," Claire said, keeping her face professionally composed, while internally her mother was dancing somewhere in her ribcage. "There's one thing," Ms. Park said, and her expression did something complicated. "Mr. Cha will be present for the direction meetings. He takes personal involvement in the flagship collection. I need you to be prepared for," she chose her words carefully, "his communication style." "I understand," Claire said. She did not understand, not yet. The first direction meeting was held in the company's main boardroom, a room so deliberately impressive that it functioned more as a statement than a workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing Seoul's skyline. A table that seated 20. Artwork on the walls that anyone with knowledge would recognize as genuinely significant pieces, not corporate reproductions. Christian was already seated when Claire entered with Ms. Park. He sat at the head of the table, naturally, inevitably, the way gravity organizes itself around heavy objects. 3 senior designers flanked him, along with 2 people from the business side. His suit today was black, perfectly tailored as always, with a single silver watch that likely cost more than Claire's annual scholarship disbursement. He did not look up when Ms. Park and Claire entered. He was reviewing documents, his attention absolute and entirely elsewhere. Claire sat in the middle of the table, neither claiming the boldness of a seat near him nor retreating to the obvious distance of the far end. Her mother's voice in her spine, "You belong here." The meeting began. Ms. Park presented the initial direction framework for the Hanu collection, and the senior designers offered their concepts. It was a sophisticated, genuinely interesting conversation about contemporary Korean fashion's relationship with its historical roots. Exactly the kind of room Claire had dreamed about sitting in. And then Ms. Park brought up her concept. "I'd like Claire to walk us through a direction I think deserves serious consideration," she said, her tone making it clear this was not a casual suggestion. Claire stood. She presented her Bojagi-Kente concept with the full command she had been raised to bring to every room she entered. She spoke about the research, the market data, the cultural moment, the technical approach. She answered 2 questions from the senior designers with the ease of someone who knew her subject completely. And then Christian spoke. "It's derivative," he said, not to Claire, to the room as if she were not the one who had been speaking. Taking 2 traditional textile forms and placing them in conversation isn't innovation. It's tourism. It treats both cultures as aesthetics to be borrowed rather than living traditions to be understood. The room went very quiet. Claire felt the blow land, not because it was entirely without merit as a critique, but because of the way it was delivered. To the air above her head, to the other people in the room, as if she were a concept on a board rather than a person who had spoken. "I'd be interested to hear more about your concern," she said, keeping her voice absolutely steady. "Could you help me understand which element you feel reads as tourism rather than genuine cultural engagement?" He finally looked at her, those dark eyes landing on her face with the particular weight of someone not accustomed to being questioned. "The execution is technically competent," he said. "The concept is culturally convenient. There's a difference between a designer who understands two traditions from the inside and one who's assembled research into something that resembles understanding." "I am from the inside of one of those traditions," Claire said quietly. "And I've spent 3 years studying the other with the seriousness that kind of understanding requires." Something moved across his face, too fast to read, too brief to name, and then the shutters came down completely and he looked away. "We'll consider multiple directions for the collection," he said to Ms. Park, dismissing Claire's entire concept without another word, and moved on. She sat back down. Her hands were flat on the table so no one could see whether they were trembling. Her mother's voice was very loud in her chest, but it was fighting something else. Something that felt like the particular exhaustion of having to be extraordinary just to be considered adequate, of having to be twice as good to receive half the acknowledgement. After the meeting, one of the senior designers, a kind man named Mr. Lee who had been with the company for 15 years, stopped beside Claire in the corridor. "Your concept is strong," he said quietly. "Give it time." She nodded and thanked him and went back to the design studio and did the only thing she knew how to do. She worked harder. Before this story goes any further, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next between Claire and Cha Christian will test everything you think you know about pride, pain, and the courage it takes to change. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. Now let's proceed.